Well, ladies and gentlemen, and in any other genders we may have as well, the time has just gone 8 p.m. A big welcome to everyone. This is our 180th webinar that we've done since we began the series when COVID began in, when was it? March 2020. So, Benji, Mazel Tov, 180 is one hell of a number. We've been watched about 6 million times since we began.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, it's incredible. But most of the credit needs to go to you for your resilience and keeping it going. And we've really seen kind of the audience really, if there's quality content, then people want to continue listening. We thought it was just be a COVID thing, but as you've shown, that people are desperate for quality content.
So, despite that, we invited Tony. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that's what the proof is that we have Tony, who not only is a recent winner of the Jewish Achievers, but is one of the unsung South African heroes in multiple different eras, as I say. So it's exciting. It's very exciting to be on a webinar again with Tony, and it's exciting to be discussing this very, very important topic in our own open way.
So, Tony, you'll see if you look into the chat that just on Zoom alone, people are watching us. For example, in Johannesburg, we got Maureen in Minnesota, we got Norman and Pearl in Beit Shemesh, we've got Lisa in Cape Town, we've got people in Florida, London, Sandton. All over the world, people have tuned in, and I think this is probably a time of great anxiety for many people in South Africa, rightly or wrongly. We're going to be discussing that this evening. But just before we do, Dylan, you're on controls this evening. A big thank you to you for giving up your evening to be on controls. Much appreciated. And as we do at the beginning of each of these, as we welcome you on behalf of the South African Jewish Report to our 180th webinar, don't forget our latest edition of the Jewish Report is in fact up and about. You can go and collect your copy of the Jewish Report, an amazing exclusive story this week. We revealed for the first time ever, and the only South African publication to do so, that the South African Consul General in Los Angeles was in fact booted out by the Trump administration. It was an exclusive breaking story that the Jewish Report broke this week. You need to go get your copy. You can go to your Pick and Pay or your Discam or your Checkers to get a copy, or you can have a look online. Don't forget that we are available online on our website, www.sajr.co.za. Dylan, it would be nice if you showed people that. And we've got an amazing new innovation. Many people are happy to read online and watch our webinars online. But one of the things that we've done as well is we now have an A4 print at home version of the SA Jewish Report. So if you go on to sajr.co.za, you can in fact download the entire edition, or you can look at each individual article. But if you want to download it and read it at home, that's absolutely something you're able to do. So there is now two versions. There are two versions of the SA Jewish Report online. You can either go and get the A4 print at home edition, or the tabloid-sided edition, which is our standard print edition. You can go do that. And also a reminder, I know we do have thousands of people who will watch us this evening. All of our webinars are available both on the Jewish Report website, as well as you can also go and see all of our webinars on YouTube as well. So don't forget about that too. And so with that, Dylan, thank you for joining us this evening. Tony, a big welcome to you. Nice to have you back on one of our programs. I said in the WhatsApp that we sent out to everyone that you are the architect of South Africa's government of national unity. Is that a fair comment?
no, it's a very generous comment. I was one of the negotiators on the side of the DA, one of six, who brought about the agreement that led to the current government of national unity last June. So I certainly I'm not the sole creator of it at all. Whether I wish to have any responsibility given what's rollicking it now is perhaps another question. 9 months later, appropriately perhaps, it's gone full term. We hope not, but it is 9 months, and it's now beset by an immediate crisis, which perhaps we can talk about, elaborate on this evening. But I was certainly involved, and I certainly helped bring it to fruition. But there were many others who had a much bigger role than I had, but I was in the room. I also, just in passing, chatting to you a little before we commenced, Howard and Benji, I kept a diary of every single event that I was involved in those 30 days that did rather change the political landscape. And in a book that I'm bringing out next month in May, 12th of May, called Being There, Backstories from the Political Front, it's incidentally not just about the GNU formation. There's quite a lot about the Middle East, Israel, Sharon, Arafat, a lot of other characters people be familiar with, whom I met over the years. I put it out there, and I don't know what we're going to talk about the future to the extent we can tell it from tonight. But I think a lot of the issues which have now percolated right to the surface were always evident during those negotiations. And
so Tony, before we get into that, I just want Dylan to bring up a copy of the book and also to post a link, because you can in fact order the book online, and you're going to tell us where we can come to book launches, at least for the people in South Africa. But this is the book. It's called Being There. It's book number
6.
Book number 6, and it's going to be available from the 12th of next month.
12th of May. It's going to be released on the 12th of May. We've got thank you, Howard. There are quite a few events in Cape Town. To start with, there's a Cape Town Press Club on the 12th, Exclusive Books Waterfront on the 13th, and then on the 17th, it's at the Franschhoek Literary Festival with Dennis Davis, and then we go to Joburg or Durban at the Pavilion on the 19th. I'm just looking at all this. The Belito on the 20th, and then Pretoria on the 21st, and then Joburg is on Thursday, the 22nd of May at 6 at Hyde Park Exclusive Books. Then there's a Kingsmead Literary Festival on Saturday, the 24th, and then on the 25th, which I think some of the folk watching this who in Joburg might be interested in, is at the Rabbi Harris Community Centre at 10:30 on Sunday, the 25th, with Mandy Wiener will be interrogating me. She's also very conversant with a lot of the themes in the book.
So Tony, Johnny's asking whether there'll be an audio book as well. And
yeah, I've just recorded it. Yeah, and I guess that Jonathan Ball Publishers will release that with the print version. So it's going to be on audio as well.
And a Kindle version?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. So Tony, let's start again for the sake of context. Take us through those 30 days in June, or the 28 days in June. Run us through a little bit of a history. What was it like? How did those negotiations go? What were your instructions? Give us a sense of history.
All in the book. But just really the headline, Howard, is I was asked by John Steenhuisen, the DA leader, to be in his negotiating team, and I rushed to Joburg on about the 1st of June, 2nd of June, and the problem right from the beginning, and that's part of the problem now. It's not the whole of the problem. I think the essence of the current problem was evident then, and that's the ANC does not negotiate in good faith, and when they sign agreements, even if they do it in good faith, they regard it, as my late great Philip Penchars once said. He said, a written legal agreement for our client is simply a basis for further negotiation. So I think that's where we are at the moment. But back then, the problem is that the South African Constitution, which was imagined there'd never be a situation where no party would win 50%, and the ANC only won 40% on May the 29th last year, makes it an absolute requirement, not something you can get away from, that Parliament will meet within 14 days of the declaration of the election result. And at that meeting of Parliament, among other things, they've got to elect a president. So the question became, would the DA, with its 87 members of Parliament, vote for Ramaphosa as president, in which case Ramaphosa would get elected president, because remember, the MK and the EFF voted against him becoming president, or would they abstain or do something else? And in order for the DA to agree to vote for Ramaphosa, there had to be an agreement from the DA's point of view. And so we signed this agreement, statement of intent, which I still have my original copy of, which contains a whole lot of provisions which relate to how South Africa was going to be governed after a government of national unity, which at that stage included only three parties, the DA, the IFP, and the ANC. There'd been a suggestion that the others brought in. And almost from the get-go, from the date that this was signed on the 14th of June, and our signature was necessary for us to vote for Ramaphosa to get him elected president that day, and there were a lot of last-minute haggling, negotiation, rearranging of terms, we were told up front, it was agreed that, it's written here, that no other parties would be brought into the government of national unity without notification of the parties to this agreement, namely the DA and the ANC. That was dishonored. And, you know, I don't want to sound, you know, like a point-scoring lawyer here. I once was a lawyer and perhaps used to score points, but I'm no longer one. But almost from the beginning, the ANC started backtracking, undermining, walking back on its own written, signed commitments. And I think that's where we are today. But, you know, another legal eminence, who I was also involved with when I was an attorney, phoned me up the day after this agreement was signed. And he said something to me that was very important. He said, you know, he was very pleased it happened, because just let me say this without going to making this over elaborate, Howard. It wasn't that the DA was signing an agreement with the ANC because it wanted to. It was signing an agreement with the ANC. There'd been a lot of historic 30-year enmity between the parties, because if they didn't do that, there was every indication that the ANC would go shopping around for other parties and partners, and they were engaged in discussions with the EFF at the time. So it wasn't a choice between good and worse, it was a choice between bad and very much worse. But anyway, my other legal mentor phoned me up on the day after this, on the 15th of June, and he said to me, you know, Tony, what you've got in this agreement, it's very important we've got it, is not a legal agreement that you can go to court to enforce its terms. This is a political agreement, and it depends on the politicians to make it work. And if you just take that phrase and you apply it to where South Africa is tonight, as we're speaking on this webinar, Howard and Benchy and everyone else, it's up to the politicians, despite the fact I can take you root and branch through all the violations and the bad faith, which has kind of, I think, been the leitmotif of this entire government. So I think that's very important to note at this stage. The second thing was we could only agree to the bare bones of something in the 14 days. And then after the election of Ramaphosa, we then had to move on to the division of the spoils, as it were, who would get what, which positions, how many, and so on. And that led to an intractable series of what was the meaning of proportionality, that the cabinet should be allocated a proportional amount. And I'm always amazed today, people say, oh, the DA is being arrogant. That's a favorite put down. The DA is overreaching itself. That's another favorite. Actually, the DA settled, let's be quite clear, and I mentioned this in my book because I said it to Steenhuisen at the time. This is a very mediocre deal for the DA. But for South Africa, it's very much a better deal than anything else on the table. And you saw that, as you might recall, and folks watching at home will know this, that immediately after the government of national unity was formed, the bond rate yields came down, the rand price went up, the JSE surged. And what you're seeing now is a reversal of those metrics. If you read Annabelle Bishop of Investec's forecasts on what the rand might yet do, from a bad place to a very much worse place, should this arrangement fall apart in the next few days or weeks. So it was a very difficult negotiation because you weren't playing with endless time. And another friend of mine in London, Sir Mick Davis, said to me at the time, he said, you know, you were always negotiating one trump short, as he put it rather elegantly, because what was missing from the DA pack wasn't that the DA could say to the ANC, you know, take it or leave it. It was if the DA left the table, the EFF or the MK were waiting just outside the door, and a lot of people in the ANC wanted them to come in. So in a way, the DA was the thin blue line between the ANC going into business with something far worse than the ANC, which was once part of the ANC, or going into what I thought was a mediocre deal with the DA. And frankly, and those were the alternatives. It wasn't that there was perfection versus destruction. It was a less suboptimal series of options, and I think it was in the best interest of the country, arguably maybe the DAs as well, to go in and try and make this thing work.
Tony, is the crux, the nub of all of this, the interpretation of clause 19 of that agreement you have in front of you?
No, I think, well, we can go into clause 19. The 19 is the deadlock breaking mechanism, but 19 is a symptom, not a cause of the current crisis. Now, what clause 19 says, and this really, there was fighting with Ramaphosa personally while he was the other end of the computer, right up to the last minute. But in the event of a disagreement that you cannot achieve consensus, then parties to the GNU who constitute 60% of the seats in the National Assembly agree. Then it becomes an agreement. Now, there are only two parties in the GNU. You can forget about the others. There are only two that reach 60%. ANC 40, DA 22. There are no other combination of parties, of all those parties in the GNU, the other 8 or so, or 7, that get to that total. So essentially, this agreement was a disguise, what they call in Germany, grand coalition between two parties. The others were brought in to disguise the fact that it was effectively a two-party government. And the ANC has refused to effectuate that clause or any of the other fundamental clauses because it doesn't want to be in a position where it has to share some power. So, Howard, to answer your question briefly, this crisis has come about because the DA, correctly in my view, and not just for its partisan interest, but in the country's interest, wants some power. Not all of the power. It's said in its current communication with the ANC. We recognize the ANC is twice as large as the DA, but the DA is still a 22% party, not a 2% party, not a 0.2% party, as some of these other parties such as BOSA and Action SA are really in those figures of 0.2 to 2. The DA is 22. And it cannot, and let me just tangentially go off here. People say, I was on a high FM interview, and shouldn't the DA do more about the ICJ case? Shouldn't the DA do this? Well, the DA doesn't have 50% of the seats. If the DA had 50%, we'd be in a different universe, and South Africa had a different foreign policy. But it's got to have some power if it's going to remain in a power-sharing government. If it has no power in that government, if it can't affect in some way the economic course of this country, can't get us out of this ditch which we've been dug into by bad politics and bad policies, then there is no purpose to being in that government. And I think that's what the current contest is about.
Benji, you had a question?
Tony, yeah, Tony, can you maybe clarify for our viewers, what is the difference between a GNU and a coalition?
Well, arose by any other name, Benji. This is a coalition government because there were two options, whatever you choose to call it. They like the word GNU. And because there was a GNU in 1994, not a great precedent, incidentally. It lasted for 2 years and then collapsed. The previous GNU, the first one, 1994, with Mandela and de Klerk, was a result of a constitution arrangement, which said any party with 10% or more of the seats gets or 5% gets a cabinet seat. And the National Party got 6 seats in the cabinet and the deputy presidency, not because they were needed, because the ANC got 62%. So it didn't need the National Party votes. When the National Party, led by de Klerk at the time, left the GNU, the government continued because they had 62% seats in parliament. This GNU, the current one, is a coalition because without the parties in the GNU voting for the president, Ramaphosa, he wouldn't have been elected president on the 14th of June last year. You saw last week in Parliament when there was absolutely a razor-thin passing of the fiscal framework. Incidentally, just to me park that for a second, you do know that the MK party, which voted with the DA against the budget or the fiscal framework, was missing, I think, 8 or 10 MPs. So that result being a whole different ball game when they're fully up to strength, as they will be presumably by the next round of the budget vote. And it also is contingent then on every single ANC MP pitching up to vote, which has never happened in history, not even last Wednesday. So you need, if you're going to have a coalition, it means there's a coalescence of parties to create a majority. The ANC does not have a parliamentary majority. They are 10% outside of a majority. They need a coalition, whether it's a formal one in the form of a GNU or a vote-by-vote coalition, which they could get, but very unstable without this GNU arrangement. It's a coalition. That's what it is.
And
So, Tony,
can I ask you?
Sorry, Ninja.
If you one of the justifications for the GNU has been this like doomsday pact that could have happened, this MK-EFF pact. The counter to that is that Ramaphosa is so weak, that actually he was one of the biggest proponents of the GNU. How do you feel about that comment? Do you think it's
well? It's very interesting.
The threat of the Doomsday Pact is not actually as big as we think it is.
Look, I really can't read the tea leaves inside the ANC, because it's a party with many factions and many different wings in it. I don't think they're ideological. I think a lot of it's about personality and power. I don't know what Ramaphosa's game plan is at the moment. He's almost often appears to be an interested bystander in his own administration while others fight it out. I certainly think, and it was very well put actually by Makudu Safara, who's into the Sunday Times, wrote a very interesting and I thought highly accurate column in the Sunday Times on Sunday, where he said, look, this appears to be a fight between the ANC and the DA. And at one level, obviously it is, because they're two parties who are needed to make the country governable. But actually, the real fight is behind the screen, and it's inside the ANC. And if the DA is ejected from the GNU as a result of the ANC making it eject or pressing the eject button, then Ramaphosa is next for the firing line, because the forces who are not entirely, and nothing is a straight line, but by and large, the forces who are most hostile and resistant to the DA being in this government, and they were resistant incidentally last June, they've just gathered a bit of momentum in the 9 months since, are the people who are most opposed to what you might call the Ramaphosa wing, whatever that is, of the party, and believe a much more congenial set of arrangements can and should have been made with the EFF-MK. In other words, a reunification of the old ANC under a government of coalition or government coalition. So I think that's the line of sight, as they like to say in politics.
So, Tony, I want to be unfair to you, but you're no longer leader of the DA, so I think
No, I'm not.
So I can pose this to you. How do you think the DA is done as a party in the GNU?
You know, Howard, it's my judgment's one thing. I think they've done very well in some areas. I think there've been a few missed opportunities in others, and I'm not a partisan hack. So actually, in the book, I look at where I think one can be critical, but I think overall, I think they've performed well, and in an absolute sense, because if you look at some of the changes in the Department of Home Affairs, in the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, maybe in digital technologies and communication, if the Starlink thing goes through, I think they've done well. In terms of being able to change the policy course of the country, there's been less success, and that's why there's such a fight now at the heart of the government over this budget. But you see, what I think, or you think, or even sort of listeners pro and against think, I think, as we used to say in the old South Africa, default dar beta, looking at the people out there, looking at the opinion poll that was published just this week by Brenthurst Foundation, says actually, I think 67% was the figure of South Africans believe that this government, this GNU, is much better than the last government. Well, you might say that's a low bar. But what was interesting, to answer your question, Howard, is the DA's support among registered voters on a modeled turnout model has actually gone up reasonably significantly. I think from about 21, 22% to around about 27%. The ANC support's also gone up a bit, which suggests actually it's good for both parties and arguably it's good for the country. So I think that's the answer. And yeah, but you know, once that's part of it. But I think the DA needs a heightened sense of responsibility because it doesn't just want to throw its toys out the cot and say, well, you know, you've been very rude to us and you ignore us, so we're going, because I think there are bigger issues at stake here.
May I challenge you on that answer? Because if I were a DA supporter, I would say, what were the big issues that the DA actually campaigned on? And it was Bella Bill, Expropriation Act. There was even some RCJ, NHI. And on all of those key issues, which seem to be bread and butter issues for the party, there's been no benefit to the DA supporters at all. The ANC has ridden roughshod over all of them. And so I want to challenge your assumption that they've done okay when, to their voters and their constituency, maybe the things that are important to them, they failed.
Well, I'll address that briefly, Howard, but I guess if you did a poll now of just the folk, the guys, women, men, women, children, watching this podcast and said, okay, here's your vote. The DA hasn't been very successful in this government, should have been more successful. As a result of not being successful, they should leave it. I would think about 7 in 10 of the viewers of this would say, don't leave. So that's your baseline, and maybe you should test it, because it's not that the DA, you know, has been got everything it wanted or even a portion of what it wanted. It's what would have happened if they weren't there. There's a very interesting article, I think by Peter Dutoy in News 24 this afternoon, where he reminds you what happened. He said why it's so important for the DA to be in the room, not because they can achieve all the things you suggested and I wish they'd achieved, but because what would happen in that room if they weren't there would be much worse. Just going through those issues. Look, there's an answer to all of them, but I'm not the DA spokesman. NHI has absolutely not happened. It's much spoken about, the billboards are up, but the funds have not been appropriated for it. And I would hazard a guess, not that I have any mandate from the DA on this program, that if NHI is introduced full ball, the DA would not stay in the government. That is a absolute break issue. It's much clearer than, you know, the budget machinations, for example. And it's not just 0.5% on VAT, it's the destruction of private healthcare. The argument, and I'm not saying I subscribe to the argument, on the other bills you mentioned, expropriation and Bella, was that those pieces of legislation had already been enacted by the last parliament. So it wasn't that the DA could stop them, they'd already, that train had left the station. The DA could indeed have delayed the implementation of Bella. The reason they didn't do so, this is their version, is that their minister, who happens to be the Minister of Education, Basic Education, Gweruba, she is the minister who will set the regulations and enact the regulations that will govern Bella. So you can say to yourself, okay, well, much better that they'd stopped Bella, but they couldn't or didn't or didn't have a majority in Parliament to do so. But surely it's better that there's a DA minister tamping down via the regulations that the minister controls than having an MK minister pushing through Bella. These are arguments, Howard. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I always, you know, I write like you. I write columns in the newspaper. I speak on your excellent webinars. I write books. But when it comes to political decision makings, when you're a 22% party, you can't necessarily choose between good and bad. You've got to sometimes say, well, I'm going to go with this because I can mitigate its worst excesses. It's not very politically sexy, this, Howard. It's not, it's all rather messy. But I think there's a degree of realpolitik in any set of governing arrangements where you have some power, but you are a minority power.
Tony, can I
Can I just,
Can I?
before
Yeah,
you ask
okay.
your question, Benji, I'm going to ask Dylan because Tony posed the question. If we polled the people watching, well, at least for the people on Zoom, we can in fact poll them. So,
Okay.
Dylan, I'm going to ask you, please, if you could do a poll. And I think the first question we're going to ask is: should the DA, number one, stay in the GNU under at all costs? Number two, leave the GNU. Number three, stay in the GNU if it can make an impact.
Yeah. And I think their view, that I'm not speaking
Yeah.
for them, would be number three, that they believe they'll only stay in if they can have some impact. Yeah, that'd be their vertrekbeginsel. Yeah, I think.
Dylan's just going to put that poll together for us. Sorry, Benji, I interrupted you.
No problem. So Tony, Paul here said that you're their hero. So I just want to put that out, that it's probably in one of our comments. So just so that my comments next are not seen in the wrong direction. And I agree with that. And it's a good hero to have. But I've heard this and listening and reading, and I think about it a lot. This idea that there's going to be a doomsday pact has led to almost the shifting of the goalposts all the time, because almost you can justify any behavior of the DA if there's going to be a doomsday. So, well, we got to go with Bella because there's going to be a doomsday. We got to go with NHR because there's going to be a doomsday. And I know there's been a lot said about it. I know there's been a lot of podcasts. Saka Licha had something on this. I wonder how you feel about like that kind of criticism towards this justification. Well, I better do this because there's going to be this doomsday.
I think it's a highly valid criticism. It's an entirely appropriate observation. You put up a scarecrow, and that then prevents you from making major decisions. So I am not to be found, not that I'm the decider on this by any means, I'm not to be found among the people who say, stay in at all costs under any circumstances, subject to any humiliations that the ANC might visit upon you. That's not my position. I genuinely believe, but they must speak for themselves, let me be clear, that no one in the DA leadership is of that opinion either. So I think that's the first thing. And I think unless, as a result of this current crisis, which, might be an opportunity, they always say that's the one good thing about crisis. A crisis is it's also an opportunity. Might be to get a fundamental reset. Well, according to the ANC today, there is going to be a reset one way or the other, and that might be clarifying, and maybe it's overdue after 9 months. I just say you don't need a reset, you just need to implement what you signed up to, but that's another matter. So I don't think the DA should put up with any set of circumstances. The only thing, and I've offered this opinion to the DA, so let me offer it out here. This is a very big decision. You should not take it lightly. You should not say, as to use a wonderful South African word, I'm hutful now. I've had it up to here. I'm not putting up with this for a single nanosecond longer. I'm out. Goodbye. Do your damnedest, as Mr. John Forster once told the world to do, and it duly obliged, incidentally. I don't believe in that. I think they've just got to be thoughtful, and they mustn't panic. In fact, one of our more distinguished citizens, Adrian Gore, I think made that point the other day in a general context. He said, the worst kind of decision making is when you personally feel that your whole future's on the stake, and you don't necessarily think. You've got to have a degree of appropriate, you're involved, detachment, and say, let's weigh this up. We go, there are going to be a lot of consequences. We stay, there's certain consequences. You take it all together, and you make the decision. Listen, I'm not sure that, and I really speak here because people speak to me. I don't know that the ANC gets just how much anger there is among the rank and file in the DA towards the ANC. And for a lot of the issues that Howard itemized earlier, causes deep, deep anger inside the DA. And the leadership of the DA, unlike certain other parties, is actually accountable to its members. So it's not making this in a pressure-free environment, the decision to stay or to go or to reformulate. But I think an act of leadership is to weigh this all up carefully, judiciously, and then make a decision. So that's what I think is the appropriate response.
Tony, can we move on to the current crisis, and maybe you can walk us through what actually happened as far as you know in the current crisis?
Well, and let me be very brief here, Howard, and my understanding might be incomplete. The AN, once again, at the risk of being a bore, if I quote from the statement of intent, the actual signed agreement between the two parties, there was an agreement that as soon as the government had been formed, there would be a lechotla, or what they call a strategy session, at which the parties to the government would go away and agree an economic program and set it up. And that would be the direction of travel, which would be reflected in the budget. 9 months after the formation of the GNU, that's never happened. What did happen was that after some desultory consultations between the Minister of Finance and his deputy, who's the DA, Ashos Rupin, the Minister of Finance called the cabinet together with the final form of the budget 2 hours before the budget was presented to Parliament, I think on the 19th of February. That was take it or leave it. We're going to Parliament 2 hours. And the DA said, no, we can't agree to this, mainly because of the tax hikes, among other things. So they had to call off the budget vote. What then happened was not what should have happened under any law of partnership. What should have happened was the ANC should have said, okay, there's a disagreement in the government. Let's talk to the governing parties or partners, starting with the DA, since they're the most opposed to this budget. They never did that. They went and talked to the parties opposed to the GNU outside the government. That was their first conversations, were outside the government, not inside. And then they presented another budget with a few tweaks. So the VAT rate went down from 2% to 0.5% this year, 0.5% next year, or whatever it was. And they said, basically, again, take it or leave it. In the meantime, the DA had said, look, we want to support the budget. We can't support the budget as is now, because there isn't enough there to actually bring up growth and bring down expenditure. So two obvious things you've got to do. So we make a whole lot of proposals. And they sent a document, I thought it was a considered document, very politely written, and it sat on the president's desk for 11 days, and no response was forthcoming until the second budget was presented, and then they went into the Finance Committee, and they pushed through the fiscal framework with the assistance of the Action South Africa, which I think was, well, I won't talk about them because I'm not sure that they knew precisely what they were doing. But whether they did or they didn't, whether they voted for a VAT increase or didn't vote for a VAT increase, the ANC went outside the government to seek support for its budget. Now, on the ANC's version, of course, the DA excluded itself from the government by voting against the budget. But that's actually putting the cart before the horse. The horse that bolted was when the ANC didn't enter into, when I say good faith, bad faith, no faith negotiations with its coalition partner on the budget after it was indicated that the budget wouldn't have a majority from the governing parties to the GNU. That's what happened. What's now happened is the DA has really given a pared down set of proposals, which are very moderate stuff. Let's look at the procurement bill. That's where a lot of the corruption misspending happens. Let's bring ports and rail into a more privatized concessionary space. Well, it just drives economic growth. Let's get Operation Vulindlela, which in the presidency at least have the DA some participation. The moment a sealed off mandate that they have no say in. So the DA is saying, we want to have some say in the economic policy and directions country. Otherwise, we'll have no say in achieving growth and job creation, which is why we entered the government. So I think that's why we're where we are. Having said that, Howard, without being over technical, What happened last Wednesday was just one part of the budget process. That's the fiscal framework that sets the tax rate, so on. The next thing is each departmental budget's got to be voted on, and then you get, at the end of the day, and only in about 2 months, an appropriation bill where the whole budget goes before Parliament for a yes/no vote. So, this story is not over yet.
So, Tony, I'm going to ask Dylan to bring up a poll. Now, the polls work on Zoom. Unfortunately, they don't work on YouTube and Facebook. But let me tell you what the poll says. And Dylan, I'm going to ask you if maybe you can post this to Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. It says, what should the DA do? Single choice. And it's stay in the government of national unity at all costs to stop the EFF and MK. Should they leave the government of national unity? Should they stay in the GNU if they can make a difference? Now, that's our poll that people should be able to see. It says hosts and panelists cannot vote. I'm not sure why. Dylan, I don't think anyone can vote on this one because I don't see anything happening there. So I think there's a setting that you have to go to. If you could just re-look at that, please, and we'll bring that up again. But I don't think anyone can. Someone said they just voted. So sorry, Dylan, if you can put it up again, people can vote. I just couldn't see. Maybe because you're the host, Dylan, that's why I couldn't see how people were voting.
We're getting a lot of votes coming in.
Okay, if you could just put it on the screen again. Is it on people's screen?
Yeah, we've already got over 250 votes already.
Okay,
490 people. So everybody's very keen to take part.
Fantastic. We'll leave that up for another few minutes, and then we'll come back and actually look at the results as well. I think it's going to be interesting, Tony, because people in the comments have very much been saying stay in at all costs to prevent the EFF and MK from coming in.
If I can tell you, I mean, a South African of great eminence phoned me the day before this agreement was signed, and I was mulling over it, and he said to me, and he's a big business guy in this country, and he said, Tony, just do a deal on any terms with the ANC, because if you don't do a deal, question one will happen, and that's, I see getting a lot of votes here, 50%. If you don't do it, the EFF and MK will come. And he said, then the country is just going to be a catastrophic failure. It might be a failure anyway, but that assures failure. So that to me, and that really was one of the motive factors for the DA going in with an indifferent deal at best. And I think it's still a factor now, but at the end of the day, for all the very sharp questions you, Howard, and Benji have asked, and I guess a lot of folk at home would ask too, if you can't do anything to make a difference, which I see is on 49%, we've got a race here between doesn't matter, no difference, and we've got 49.
So let's tell people the results so far. So 50% say stay in the GNU under all circumstances to prevent MK and EFF getting in. 1% say that the DA should leave, and 49% say stay in the GNU if you can make a difference.
Yeah. So it's literally 50-50. Yeah.
Yeah. So can I ask, because Prince earlier posed the question in the chat section, he said, Paul Mashatile is saying the DA is no longer welcome. Should we listen to him, or is this all getting involved in internal squabbles and politics for succession and ousting of the president? Does Paul actually have a vote, and should we listen to what he's saying?
Oh, Paul's got a big vote. He's got the number 2 vote. He's the deputy president. To even help South Africa becomes a president, which must be a real possibility. He's not, I wouldn't go to him for a handbook on ethical governance. Let me just be as polite and diplomatic as I once was. So he's got a vote. He's got a very loud voice. Strange enough, he was being completely silent on all important matters of geostrategic significance until it came to the weekend when he saw his moment. And his moment, he thinks, is if he can get the DA out, his chances of succeeding actually sooner. I think he would move quickly afterwards, and I think Ramaphosa might be ejected, as indeed his 2 predecessors, as you recall, Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma never finished their second term. So we've got quite a lot of form, as they say in horse racing, on the issue of second-term ANC presidents.
Doesn't that make the point that actually the DA is stronger than they think they are?
Could be, but you know, but I just want to go to Howard's point. It's such an important one, and he used exactly, if I might say, the right word, noise. There is a huge amount of noise, so you've got to, in a way, have a noise cancellation earphone on, or two set of them at the moment, and you've got to say, look, you must say what you like. You must, you know, Imbalula must, you know, rant and rave. I want to see what's, if I don't think it's a word much used in ANCDA circles. I want to see what the tachlis is here. What's the bottom line? We've put a set of proposals. What is your response to them? And if we think there's response actually creates a viable way forward on the sort of economic outlook and prospects for the country, then we can do business. So I think you've got to actually see what emerges. And it's a bit messy, it's very unpleasant, it's very noisy. But there is, as Howard suggested in his question, a lot of noise right now. But we've got to separate the noise from the substance. And at the moment we're hearing a lot of noise because that's what it is. We haven't seen the substance or the lack of it.
So, Tony, you were very diplomatic in referring to Paul Mashatile, but the two parties that the ANC went to in order to pass the budget framework were Action SA, Herman Mashaba, and Bossa Musi Maimane. And both of them said they voted for the framework, but the agreement was that the ANC would reconsider VAT and certain expenditure. Is that a pipe dream? What do you think of those two parties and the way they behaved?
Well, not much at all. Look, the Action South Africa reminds me of the infamous remark of John Kerry, who managed to get walloped by George W. Bush in the 2004 presidential election, where John Kerry, you know, was trying to justify, well, actually, he voted in favor of the war in Iraq, but then he was against it. And first he was in favor, then he was against it. So Action SA seems to be in that unfortunate John Kerry space. Yes, we were against it, but then we voted in favor of it. Now, I don't know. Look, the fiscal framework's baked in. It's happened. You might have got I got an SMS from my cell phone provider telling me my account's going up 0.5, so they're obviously not aware of Action SA's heroics. But and also the other thing, there might be some movement on VAT, well, I say only 0.5%. But I seem to recall Action SA also coupled that insistence with bracket creep being removed from the tax brackets. Well, they seem to have gone very, very quiet about that, because I suspect Treasury said, well, we might tweak something on VAT. There's no adjustment on bracket creep. So there will be tax rises, whether they're direct tax rises or indirect tax rises. I frankly can't speak for Musi Maimane. Look, it's a two-seat party. Whatever his gifts are or aren't, and I've got a chapter on him in my next book, whatever his gifts are, or whatever his gifts are to the body politic, he brings 2 votes to the table, 2 out of 400. So the ANC, I'm sure,
but he does push in a coalition without the DA. He does push the ANC, all the rats and mice parties, Action SA, 200, and Bossa brings that to 202. It gives the ANC a majority.
Absolutely, but it's a completely unstable majority. There's no stability in that. I'm not even sure it does get to 200. Well, I suppose the Freedom Front goes, the DA, I'm saying that happens. Maybe they'll get to 202. But then what is the ANC is then doing is making itself vulnerable to the whims, requirements, changing mandates of 1- and 2-person parties. Well, you've seen in Israel, Howard, how extremist parties can wield an enormous amount of power when the majority party is under siege. So if the ANC wants to be in a situation where its agenda is going to be held hostage to changing whims, just as we saw with Action SA's switcheroo around VAT, then good luck to them. And I wonder, in terms of governing stability, what message it sends about the country. You see, you can put this another way, Howard. With the DA and the ANC and the government, you've got a government which represents over 65% of South Africans. That's a broad mandate, provided they can agree on some things. Remove the DA and bring in Action SA and whoever else, and you get to this 202. You have a government that represents barely 50% of South Africa. So its mandate is much less. Its voice is much less certain, unless, and this is one of the core disagreements between the DA and ANC, and I don't know what Mr. Maimane or Mr. Mashaba say about this, unless you're simply going into government to prop up the ANC and implement an ANC agenda, but, you know, get a nice home and a cushy lifestyle for the next 4 years. If that's your agenda, but not to do anything else, then it makes eminent sense. But if you have other ambitions for the country, it makes less sense, I would suggest.
So give us some sort of inkling on what's happening behind the scenes at the moment. Are the DA and the ANC talking to each other? Should people be panicking? Is this a question asked by Sai? Is this a defining moment for South Africa that we're living through over the next week?
Well, you know, I'm always reminded of my old acquaintance, Steve Mulholland, when he turned 70 years old. He's, I think, much older now. He said, ever since I was 5 years old, I was told South Africa had 5 years to go. Well, I'm now 70 and we're both still here. So I'm always wary when people say, you know, 5 minutes to midnight, defining moments, because there are many defining moments. We live kind of a bit like that in this place. What I would say is that it's a critical moment. And I do know, and I'm not going to be engaged with him, but I'm led to believe that that the DA, the ANC has appointed some negotiators. They haven't met the DA yet, and the DA's have got some negotiators to meet, two small teams. But I understand the ANC is meeting a whole lot of other parties, including some like Lord Voldemort that may not mention, dare not mention their name on this family webinar. And I think that's going to emerge in the next few days. So the DA will have one set of... The DA is only talking to the ANC. They're not engaged in conversations with the MK, the EFF, because they've got an agreement with the ANC. I'm sure the DA is talking to some other parties in the GNU, but the fundamental discussion is between party number one, the ANC, and party number two, the DA. Party number one is also having conversations with party number 3, party number 4, party number 44. I mean, they are engaged in a lot of discussions. So I think at the end of this process, I think Mbulula said in the next 5 to 7 days, there will be some kind of conclusion. So I guess we should check in about a week's time.
We have a question from someone in the audience. I think it was Debbie. And Debbie wants to know what happens to South Africa if this breaks down and the DA actually does leave. The rand's currently sitting at 1970 to the dollar.
Yeah, well, look, according to Annabelle Bishop, and she's a pretty smart economist at Investec, we then get to at least 22 to the dollar, she predicts. And incidentally, let me say the rand is only one part of the equation. It's actually the lesser part. I mean, it's very uncomfortable if you're planning to go to, you know, spend a summer in Europe. It's very unpleasant. And if you're importing, you know, high-end goods, that's very bad. The much bigger problem is the bond rate, because, as you know, bond prices move inversely, in inverse proportion to the yield rate. And the bond rate is moving in the wrong direction. Now, you know, Moletsi and Becky sent me some figures the other day on the from SARS. So 63% or 63 cents of every rand received in revenue by the government from us, the taxpayers, is spent on government wages, public servant salaries, about 40%. And over 21 cents of every rand is spent on paying the debt service costs. So South Africa's got a 6 trillion rand national debt. It's not America where it borrows in its own currency. And we borrow on the bond market at high yield rates. That's what we do. That's a fact. So if the DA leaves the government and the bond market reacts, as the bond market will react, we've seen it already, then that 21 cents or whatever it is going to go up and up and up. So eventually maybe get to 30 cents. So a third, we could quite conceivably where a third of all the income tax, all the tax, all the revenue is being spent on paying off debt. And then you start getting close towards a debt trap. And what happens in a debt trap is the cost of borrowing just overwhelms every other item of government expenditure. And then really you're in economic wasteland. And at the very point that we say, oh, okay, well, we better call in the IMF. Just remember who controls the votes in the IMF, Donald J. Trump or his administration. You know You know what their views about us are. So yeah, it's a very ugly, I see a very ugly situation, very ugly. And that assumes, incidentally, that the normal South African patience doesn't snap, because one of the consequences we haven't talked about tonight appropriately, you've got other experts, we haven't talked about the Trump tariff.
No, we'll get there, don't worry.
No, well, not with me, but with others. But Howard and Benji and listeners, I mean, the devastation of the Trump tariffs on this country, 30% is one thing, but it's going to devastate key sectors of our economy. The automotive industry, there are thousands of jobs in the Eastern Cape tonight that are imperiled by that fact. If the automotive industry collapses, and frankly, there isn't enough bailout money as they've done for the AMSA, the steel mills in Newcastle, to go and hand that around for every failing industry, which is now going to be devastated because we've lost our tariff-free entry into America. The citrus market is very badly affected, particularly in the Western Cape, because a lot of our Western Cape citrus exports go to the US. The overall citrus is less exposed because it's comes from it goes into other markets. So what I'm saying is, you don't want to be in a situation where you've got the Trump tariff on the one hand, you've got a government dysfunction which leads to a bond rate, a spike, bond yield spike. And then, you're going to have a lot of angry people milling about saying, why don't I have any work or any prospects of work? And we really have that, but it'll just get much worse. So if I was in charge of the country, I would make a deal with economically sensible people right now.
Tony, at the beginning, I gave you forewarning that I was going to ask this question. And I asked if you were a betting man. And I asked you what would you bet on by the end of April? Would the DA still be in the GNU? Time to nail your colours to the mast.
Yeah, I think if I was to absolutely lay a bet on it, I'd say it's 50-50. I'd actually, kind of a bit like your poll tonight. I would say I'd lay money on it staying, but I'd lay off the bet immediately because I'm not sure. And, we'll know in a week or two. But I think it's fairly, I think it's finely balanced. Let me put it that way, Howard. Finely balanced.
Can we abuse you for another 10 minutes to talk about?
No, another
topics?
Another five. I promise I'll be awful. So let's go for 5.
Okay, Benji, you wanted to ask a question about Argentina where Tony was ambassador for a number of years.
Tony, I watched the president of Argentina's speech at Davos, and I was obviously very interested. And I wondered how you processed that, having been there, what you think of him, whether he is the answer to kind of some of the challenges in the world, and in general, what you feel about the outlook for Argentina, especially with your knowledge.
Yeah, I left Argentina in 2012, and however bad you think the South African government on its worst day is, believe me, the Argentinian government under the Peronists in my time, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, was far worse. Although being a diplomat, I never uttered a word of criticism about her while I was there, unlike certain other ex-diplomats that we know. So, the Peronists really plundered their country. They were populist. They were grifters. Just to take a combination of Jacob Zuma and translate into Spanish, and you kind of more or less what the Peronists did to Argentina. On the back of the fact, just like Zuma, they had an underlying popularity because there were enormous class differences in Argentina, not race differences. It was almost a completely white country today. Has been for some decades. But there was, the Peronists came to power because there were 400 families that essentially controlled the entire wealth of Argentina until 1947. And Juan Perón and his wife, Eva Perón, were elected, or he was elected, but she was the real power behind the throne, on the basis that they would, stand up for the workers. And to some extent they did. They plundered the country, but they stood up for the workers, and they destroyed a lot of its democratic institutions. And on and off, interrupted by terrible military rule, most of the electorate continued to vote Peronist. And Juan Domingo Perón, the founder of Peronism, said, Argentinians belong to different political parties, but at the end of the day, we are all Peronists. And that was true and leaving aside Macri, who was an interruption, he was a one-term opposition guy in recent times, until Millet was elected. And Millet is not, another opposition politician. He is a radical, total break from the past. But, Argentina's economic wealth destruction has been far greater than South Africa's. And the daily economic life in Argentina is much more miserable because of not the specter, but the reality of hyperinflation. I mean, these stories that you know, people, you go to the supermarket, and by the time you get till the prices change, that is what Argentina was like. I mean, it's unbelievable. I wrote a book about it, The Accidental Ambassador, just describing and how they bought off discontent, the Peronists, was to subsidize things. So you could spend it would cost you 40 cents to travel from the center of Buenos Aires to the Ezeiza airport, which is about 30 kilometers away. It was subsidized. And eventually the subsidies ran out because Argentina took some bets on its soy production, which is one of the greatest in the world. And when it doesn't yield what it wants to, then everything's off the table. And Millet said, we're not going to do this anymore. He says, I'm going to, came with a chainsaw, and he started bringing huge changes. He privatized masses of state companies, which I'd like to do here. He cut a lot of the subsidies, which is much more difficult. But he brought down inflation. And it's quite interesting. You mentioned, Bibi thinks he's Trump's best friend. It's not true. Millet is Trump's best friend. He got 0 tariffs. And he was the first foreign visitor that Trump received, was Javier Millet. So, MAGA, make Argentina great again. But look, a lot of what Millet is doing is an experiment. It's kind of applying radical liberationist economics in one country. And it's an experiment that so far has brought some significant gains, very significant, but it's brought quite a lot of pain, and it's got a way to go. And the problem that Millet has is he doesn't have a parliamentary majority. He doesn't control the legislature. He doesn't control the governorships, where a lot of the power is in many of the states. So it's a work in progress. But look, it's a democratic revolution, and some of the results, I think, are excellent.
So, Tony, in the last 2 questions.
Howard, what makes you're a Jewish negotiator?
I am, but I feel like these are really pertinent and important for people to hear the answers to.
Okay, I'll get 2 brief answers.
So Helen Zille thinks you should be the South African ambassador to the United States. I presume that's not a real possibility that the ANC would permit at this point in time.
I think the Kremlin is more likely to call me before the ANC does. I was strange enough appointed ambassador by Jacob Zuma, but that was in a day where we actually had a very uncontroversial foreign policy back in 2009. And I've made the point, leaving aside me, you can argue about who the ambassador to America should be. Anyone, ABR, anyone but Rasul would be better, actually, at this point. But the truth is, it's not so much the messenger, Howard, it's the message. And frankly,
I want to actually, the real question was, if you were called in by the cabinet today and said, give us some advice, how do we fix issues with the United States? What would you tell them?
Well, look, I've given some advice to some people who've approached me with this, and they certainly don't come from the government, but they come from people who whisper in the government's ear. I said South Africa needs to start doing some tangible things to detoxify the relationship. Now, I don't think, and it's made quite clear by Ronald de Mola and this Durko leadership, they're not going to stop the ICJ case. Anyway, I don't even know if they can, if they wanted to, because it's now been argued and the judgment is awaited. But I'll tell you one thing that I advise them to do, and I say this having met 2 of them. I would, South Africa, to use a Rasul phrase, sounds quite ridiculous and grandiose now, moral superpower, call unequivocally for the release of the hostages being held by Hamas. And don't couple it with, on the one hand, this, just call for it. They keep banging on about human rights. They keep saying they're not in favor of enslavement of people. They keep saying that they are moral superpower. Well, moral superpowers, or even moral mini powers, actually stand up for human rights. So that's one thing they could do. They could do it in a very straightforward way, and it would cost them nothing. except, it might actually say, well, maybe these folk are not just sort of, one-eyed supporters of Hamas and the extremist agenda of the Islamic fringe, which is how South Africa is seen to be. The second thing I would do is look at what America wants from South Africa. Well, they want quite a few things, but let's assume, I don't know how long it's going to last, the bromance, that Elon Musk is a major influence in Trump world, and I think he is. Why not fast-track Starlink to South Africa, for example? Now, that's going to require some, amendment or adjustment on these BEE regulations, which are themselves, I think, aggravating for Trump world. So I would say, well, actually, if we're serious about getting, high-speed, cheap internet into rural schools, which is one of the great add-ons of Starlink, then let's fast-track their accession to South Africa. And, you can work out a list of things which don't require the surrender of your sovereignty or whatever other nonsense they speak. Actually, we surrender our sovereignty every time we go and buy bonds on the bond market, or sell bonds in our case. We are net sellers, not buyers, South Africa, because someone else, some stranger, is making a decision about the worth of SA Inc. If the price is so low of SA Inc., you're going to pay more. And one of the reasons to mitigate that price shock is to find points of agreement with the United States administration. So I think Howard, I think there are a range of things that can be done, short of, a wholesale rewriting of our foreign policy, which is what I'd like to see. But in the world of realpolitik, I don't know I'm going to see in the next year or so.
As an incentive to allow Benji to ask you the last question, I'm going to ask Dylan to bring up a copy of your book, available again from the 12th of next month. Look out for launches at exclusive books at the Cape Town Press Club, all over the country, in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town. People should go and read about the inside story of not just the negotiations for our government of national unity, but some of the remarkable people that Tony has met around the world. Benji, are you sneaking in that last question?
Tony, I can't wait to get your book, and I look forward to reading it. We don't like leaving these webinars on anything else, but some nugget of positivity, just something that you think people are thinking about wrong, that actually leaves us in a better position than when we started.
Well, look, in fact, I mentioned my book. My stepson, Itai Ibn Zahav, has a wonderful phrase that he said to me many years ago, absolutely appropriate now. He said, if you look at South Africa in terms of the state and the government, it will fill you with despair. He said, if you look outside the state and outside the government, there are some extraordinary, wonderful things happening in South Africa. And with the best government, the worst government, the most indifferent government, whatever government of national unity, government of no unity, those things and those people, like the audience tonight, are still out there. And, they count. And their voices are also, to me, very important.
Tony, we're going to let you go. Look for Chamates now and clean your home before Pesach. Chag Sameach to you, to Michal, and to the entire family.
Tony.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been such an honor and such a pleasure to get your insight and for you to be able to share it with the really thousands of people who've watched us tonight on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, and here on Zoom as well. So thank you so much. I want to tell everyone, as we say goodnight to them, and Tony, you can turn off your camera and microphone and leave us so we don't delay you any longer.
Howie, before you end off, I'm actually interested, and I know the audience will be interested, in your view. You're a considered fella. You've got lots of information. You're very modest the way you interview people. Well, if you were a betting man, what would you bet?
So I'll tell you, I'll give you an answer. But before I give you the answer, I want Dylan to bring up something on the screen. You and I are volunteers. We don't get paid for any of this, but we produce the Jewish Report and we distribute in hundreds of locations around the country. And we give people webinars and newsletters and print And, just to print the Jewish Report and distribute the Jewish Report costs us 380,000 Rand every single month. So I want to give people who are watching us this evening, there are already thousands of people who've made a donation to the Jewish Report. I want to give the thousands of people who are watching us tonight the opportunity to actually make a donation to the Jewish Report. And in an article or a letter that will appear in this week's Jewish Report, which comes out tomorrow, our Pesach edition, 40 pages, and you'll be able to either get it online or in hard copy around the country. I tell the story of Mendel Kaplan and one of the lessons that Mendel said to me. He said, if you've got a good cause, don't insult people by not allowing them to be part of it. And also don't insult them by asking for too little. So as I answer that question, we've put up on our screen the ability for people to make a donation, our bank account details, wallet doc details, or you can just go to our bit.ly link, which Dylan will post as well, and make a donation, please, to the Jewish Report. Do it in our honor. Do it in honor of 180 webinars that we've already produced, for the 6 million people who've watched us so far on our webinars. Make a donation. It makes no difference how big or how small it is. We want to know that you care. And with that, Benji, I'm going to answer your question because I have a slightly different take in all of it. Dylan, put that donation screen back up for another minute while I talk, please. I think what we're seeing at the moment has got nothing to do with VAT. It's got nothing to do with budgets. I think we're seeing a succession battle in the ANC of whether Cyril Ramaphosa will last his full term or whether he will be ousted. I think what we're seeing at the moment is the Paul Mashatile camp trying to make a play now, and you've seen in the newspapers, you saw in the Sunday Times, these stories of Paul about to be arrested. And those stories are coming out of the Ramaphosa camp. And Mashatile wants to try oust Ramaphosa before that happens. So I think we've intermeshed the story of the budget with Paul's desire to oust Cyril and do a deal with the EFF and MK that makes him president. And I think that's why Prince's question was so interesting earlier when he mentioned Paul's already saying the GNU is dead. Paul wants to kill the GNU, because if he can do that, he weakens and destroys Ramaphosa's position. And he becomes our next president through a coalition with MK and EFF. I had dinner with Jacob Zuma a week or two after the elections, and it was a small dinner. There were just 4 of us at the dinner. And Zuma said to me, give me till November 2024, and I would have split the ANC and I will be back in power. Now, that didn't happen, but a deal may well be in the offing. And what we're watching at the moment, I think, is very much that succession battle. So what do we look out for? We look out for what the Rand is doing, because the markets, people believe and know, and people will be making money, the people in the know, on what's happening. So look at the bond market, look at the Rand, but most importantly, look at the differentials between the things coming out of the Ramaphosa camp. And if you're on Twitter, follow Gulam. Gulam is a sycophantic character supporting the Ramaphosa camp, but with great insight to what's happening within that Ramaphosa camp. And look at Paul Mashatile, what's he saying, and try weigh up between the two to actually get a better understanding of what's really happening in the country. Benji, I'm going to ask your opinion. Dylan, you can take down our slide. If the people haven't made a donation yet, then it's too late. Then we don't want your money.
Howie, so what's your bet?
I'm betting actually the GNU is going to stand. I think, as I understand it, Ramaphosa will never do a deal with EFF and MK no matter what happens, because he knows it means he's ouster. So a GNU has to stand. His preference will be to keep the DA in. It will be really difficult to keep Action SA and Bossa in unless he makes complete concessions relating to this. And I'm not sure Herman wants to be in either, because he can only fight his next election as an opposition party. I'm a betting man, and I'm going to bet that by the end of the April they would have maybe plastered over lots of the cracks, but that the GNU will stand. Benji, as a last moment, as people are saying goodbye, I want to make sure that you can give us all a brocha for Pesach. We've
You
got
know,
we've
carry
got
on.
8 days celebrating freedom ahead of us.
You know, firstly, it's brilliant, Howie, and thank you. And you know, you break the middle matzah, and you say the entire Seder over the broken middle matzah. And there's a very nice insight that you can have this beautiful experience of Seder over a broken piece of matzah. And I guess it's a little bit of life, you know, that not everything is full and not everything is complete in order to have these deep, meaningful, beautiful experiences like a Seder. And I feel like the comment that Tony made is the nugget of positivity that always resides with us. And that is that the people of South Africa, no matter what kind of is thrown at them, and of course we've had the violence in KwaZulu-Natal and a little bit in Joburg, but overall, where all the opinion polls, all the things that happen, they are that are done, they show that the vast majority of South Africans are centralists, want the same things, and actually aspire to the same things. And that is incredibly positive and incredibly, it's like incredibly instructive to our society. So over that broken piece of middle matter, which South Africans are used to, in a sense, we're always dealing with some kind of crisis. But look at our own experience, that we have these beautiful experiences, and we remember this amazing experience in our own traditions in terms of the exodus of Egypt, and we do it all over a broken piece of matter, so that if things are a bit messy and things are a bit broken, it never stops us dreaming and it never stops us achieving what we need to achieve.
Can I just say, you know, in all of this, the thing that we've learned as South Africans is buckle up, you're on a roller coaster, just enjoy the ride.
Just keep going, keep swimming, just keep swimming.
So, Dylan, we're going to say goodnight to everyone. Please switch your camera back on so we can say thank you so much for giving up your evening and being on controls tonight, and for putting up our polls and everything else. Dylan, you've been unbelievable. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Howard. Thank you. It was great. Really enjoyed that.
Chag Sameach to all of you. May you have a kosher Pesach. May next year we celebrate in Jerusalem. And not only that, may the freedoms that we've won over many thousands of years, may we continue to live those freedoms on a day-by-day basis here in South Africa and around the world. And may our hostages, all 59 of them, see freedom within the next week or two as well. So, Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach, Howie.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you
Good night,
haven't,
everyone.
Please leave us a comment in the comment box. Thanks. Good night.
May Hashem bless you.